Hello and welcome to the 25th Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I would like to thank the National Grazing Lands Coalition, Food Animal Concerns Trust, Morrison's Custom Feeds, Rural Vermont, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I would also like to thank our partners. I would like to thank the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the National Resources Conservation Service. I would also like to thank Cedar Tree Foundation and the Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the 25th Grazing and Livestock Conference. The conference is brought to you by the University of Vermont Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture and the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. Enjoy the content.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Jen Colby of the UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture's Pasture Program. And we're really grateful to the grass farmers for being such terrific partners and working through all kinds of new technologies and new ideas. So welcome to the session, Creating Consumer-Friendly Bulk Meat Sales with Matt LeRoux. Matt's an ag marketing consultant and formerly of Cornell Cooperative Extension. And he'll be doing a presentation for us. And then we're going to follow it up with questions at the end. If you are someone who's watching, who's viewing this through Whova, as most of our attendees to the conference are, please look to the right of your screen. We have a Q&A section. We're really encouraging folks to ask questions in the Q&A so that other folks can vote on them, so that we really try to help figure out which are the best questions for Matt in the limited time that we have. There's also a chat if you want to have a conversation through that. And at the same time, we also have live captioning, which you can grab the link for live captioning right in the chat in Whova or Zoom. So thanks very much. I'm going to pass it over to Matt if you'd like to share a screen and get us going.
All right, thanks. And just would be good to hear that share worked. You're seeing my title slide.
You are all set. Looks great.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, hi everybody. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Technical difficulties are a reality in this, but I really admire what these folks have pulled off with holding a virtual conference, and I don't envy the challenges there. I'm going to talk about creating consumer-friendly bulk meat sales. It's a topic that I might have developed before COVID in terms of just helping farms understand their consumers better to improve their marketing skills and the advantages of selling their consumers bulk meat. But then when COVID hit, it is what really gave me the impetus to put this presentation together and to think about the ways that we can sell bulk meat direct to consumer and the ways to make that more consumer friendly, because it is, for a lot of consumers still, it's a foreign idea of buying meat in bulk. I mean, right down to the folks who actually think that they're going to receive a gigantic frozen chunk of meat. So that's the idea behind this. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I am a marketing consultant, previously with Extension at Cornell. I got my master's in food marketing at Cornell, and I started my career in agriculture in New England. In fact, working with the New England Livestock Alliance, which isn't around anymore, as well as the New England Heritage Breeds Conservancy, also not around anymore. When I worked with NELA, New England Livestock Alliance, I became a certified ultrasound technician for beef carcass quality. Went all over New England and lots of farms in Vermont to ultrasound beef cattle. And then I guess I'll also just quickly mention that while I was at Extension, I created the Cornell Meat Price Calculator. That's just some of my background and how I come to this topic. What I plan to cover with this presentation is how to understand your consumer and then create your product. Of course, we know that the product is meat, farm-raised meat, but really talk about creating that product and the details, how to make sales and get the product to your customer, talk a bit about pricing for bulk meat in its various forms, and then talk about how to reach out to consumers. So it's really supposed to be a very swift and detailed course about how to begin marketing. My idea is that for you to get started doing this, you're going to call your processors to get slots for those animals. That's the first step in meat marketing. Then to work on your pricing, because you really need to understand pricing before you move forward in the marketing process. To work on describing your product and creating the format that you're going to sell, getting yourself out online. Again, when we're talking about the COVID era, then we're going to talk really about online marketing, whether it's on Facebook or other sites, and then getting help to help get your word out. And, last year in the spring, in April, and for a few months afterwards, we were really talking about the crisis situation that was going on with meat shortages at grocery stores, because the large processing plants had shuttered or had reduced capacity during that time because their employees are getting COVID. And, that the supply chain quickly fell apart with shortages on store shelves. That situation had a silver lining for individual farms that are ready to sell meat to consumers, in that there became a boon, and I think we're all familiar with that increase in demand that happened during that time. This is a Facebook post from a friend's farm, and I had been watching their activity on Facebook for a few years now. And what I want to draw your attention to is that at the same time that meat plant closures were in the headlines, they had 51 shares of this post about beef and pork that they had for sale. So that was certainly something we'd never seen on this farm before. Really, there was a great opportunity emerging as consumers scrambled to find meat from other sources besides the grocery stores. So there is a great opportunity in that situation, and I think some of that remains today. So I'm going to dive into the marketing section now and just give you the definition that I think is most useful, which is to say that marketing is the process. Again, it's a process. It's ongoing, of understanding what the consumer wants. What that consumer wants will change over time and over different customer groups. So understanding what the consumer wants, developing the product for them, and getting it to them. It's really very simple, and we can break it into 3 basic steps: understanding the consumer, creating the product, and then making the sales and getting the product out to them. That's the essence of marketing. So when we think about an approach to marketing, my advice would be to have a marketing strategy, and a strategy is centered around a target consumer. So you're going to start to think about who are the people who buy local meat, and what do they want? And then you're going to try to understand those target consumers in order to better serve them. So I'm going to think about some main groups of people who buy local meat. And historically, if we were having this before 2020, I'd be talking to you about foodies. So foodies are food enthusiasts or locavore enthusiasts who are looking for local product. They're really seeking out an experience when we talk about foodies. The experience of trying new cuts, of eating at restaurants that buy from farms, of coming to the farmer's market and talking to you and hearing about your adventures on the farm. That's all part of an experience that they seek with their product. Might also include cooking at home and trying new recipes. So foodies, I would say, are seeking the experience when they shop for meat. Then we have the cause-driven consumer who looks to support causes that they believe in with their purchases. That cause could be a social or an environmental cause, like the humane handling of livestock or healthy soils. Right? It could also be supporting the local economy by supporting local agriculture. And the cause that they support could also be their own personal health. If they perceive that a certain meat is the healthiest and best meat for them to eat, then that's the cause that they're supporting when they make the purchase. So what we're talking about here is cause-driven buyers. We have traditional buyers, which I would call price-driven. You could also perhaps say value-driven, although arguably everyone is value-driven. Traditional buyers would be the folks who look at buying a quarter or a half or a whole animal because they see the great price advantage of just paying one price and committing to all those different cuts and all those pounds. So traditional buyers are what we'd call your freezer trade customers that buy quarters and halves and wholes. really they're coming to this product, this local meat product from a local farm because of the great price advantage with bulk buying. And then we have ethnic and religious buyers, which we can say are culturally driven, folks that want to maintain traditions, maintain recipes, finding particular cuts of meat, which might be hard to find in mainstream grocery stores, looking, for even for lamb and goat, things that are not always commonly found in traditional grocery stores. So ethnic and religious buyers or cultural buyers are trying to maintain traditions and recipes that they're used to, and even observe religious restrictions, such as when kosher or halal slaughter is necessary. So I think we can understand that the culturally driven consumer, and I'd like to remind folks that if you eat a turkey on Thanksgiving, in that act, you really are you're making a cultural purchase, right? Because you're just trying to maintain this tradition of eating turkey on that holiday. So I've given this, I've given a rundown of these four main customer groups for years now, but because of the pandemic, there is a new customer to start talking about, and that's what I'm going to call the crisis consumer. For lack of a better term, the pandemic or the crisis consumer. And I think that we could say that this consumer is really security driven. They're looking for the security of a food supply. We could also think back to when there were toilet paper shortages. It wasn't because we had a real threat to the toilet paper supply in the country, but when people went out and bought, as many rolls as they could find, that was to create a sense of security, right? The stockpiling. So what we have here is a new kind of consumer that is seeking our products and looking for the security. And I'm going to take the time to expand a bit on this particular consumer because it's the newest one, and talk about the sort of problems that consumer faces, and then the opportunities for us to solve them. So really what we're going to go through is taking time to understand this consumer better. Because I think that this consumer is probably still available to everybody, whereas you might have had to choose between some of those other consumer groups that I introduced. This one is going to be universally available. So the problems that this consumer is facing is that they want to leave home as little as possible, especially as we re-enter the winter months. People are feeling that way. They don't want to carry on the way they used to and go out on a lot of different shopping trips or a lot of different places. They really want to leave home as little as possible. They do prefer to order online with what we're calling contactless purchasing, order and pay online instead of having to deal with money and credit cards in person. They're still worried about food shortages, particularly meat. That's really, meat and toilet paper were two of the products that arguably got the most press during that development of this period last year. They're worried about bringing the virus into the home on the goods that they buy, and that is still a concern for people. Whether it's totally founded in science or not, people are still wiping down their groceries. Some people are with hand sanitizer and disinfectants and so on. They're worried about bringing things into the home that might make them sick. Because of all the impacts on employment and economy, people may not have the money during this time for very large purchases. And even if they have the money, they're possibly more interested in saving money, so maybe not making very large purchases. So these are kind of the problems I think we're facing with this crisis consumer. The way that we can understand those problems as marketers, as folks who wish to help solve those, I'm going to call opportunities. So now that people are staying at home and they don't want to leave home, we see that they're cooking more meals at home than they used to, or even most of their meals. They're doing some of that carry out and takeout, but research is showing that they cook more meals at home. That's a great opportunity because they're going to need more ingredients and even new ideas if they're getting bored in this sort of rut of what they know how to cook. People are willing to buy in bulk and stockpile, which is ideal for bulk meat sales. They're eager to buy from a shorter supply chain. So, they learned a lot, if they didn't already know it, about the general food system in the United States and how for efficiency, it's produced in central locations and then distributed. So what they've learned is, that given product in the grocery store has been touched by several different people along the food chain. And Now they are interested in finding products that come from a very short supply chain, such as from the farm to the processor to the customer. They're very eager to support local businesses, and that's a great, another silver lining that came out of the pandemic is some sense of patriotism or some sense of supporting locally owned businesses so that they'll be there when you need them. We saw that renewed support for local. People are looking for ideas for meals. So again, trying out new cuts, new recipes would certainly catch their interest. And bulk pricing, when we sell meat in bulk bundles, whether it's traditional quarters and halves or assorted bundles that I'll describe in a few slides, we can offer better pricing than when you buy that meat by the individual cut. So there's great opportunity to reach this consumer. When we think about each customer, whether we're talking about the foodie customer or the crisis consumer, it pays to research and understand that customer's needs, their motivations, their desires, and their buying habits. These are characteristics of the customer that will help us as marketers speak to them in a better way, create products that suit them better in a sincere way, really understanding these people so that we can do a good job serving them. So when we think about the needs, it's very basic. I need to feed my family, I need groceries, I need to feed my family meat. Understand the consumer speaking that way. When it comes to motivations, that's saying when I buy meat, I want to secure a bulk supply, and I want to support local farms with my purchase. So now we're getting at sort of the drivers behind meeting the needs. Desires would be anything extra that we could add to really satisfy that customer. So sort of the icing on the cake idea. I'd love to know that when I buy, secure the supply of meat to feed my family, that very few people have handled this product. That would be something extra that we can add. And then buying habits are very practical. It's just frankly how people get their stuff. So we might hear that these consumers prefer to pay online. They want to order online. They would really prefer home delivery, right? Then they don't have to leave their home, but at least they don't want to go into large crowded areas. So we take the time to understand needs, motivations, desires, and buying habits in order to serve our customers well. And what we're talking about with all this understanding and choosing a specific customer is developing what we call a marketing strategy. So that's your effort to focus all of your marketing, all of your communication on this one specific type of consumer with specific needs, motivations, and so on. So I'm going to walk you through how we develop a strategy, and that is by writing a strategy sentence. This is a technique that I really like. I think it's very easy to apply if you put a little time into it. So strategy sentence is basically the sentence that I have here, where you fill in all the words that are in red with your own words, and you want to make those words very specific so that they're meaningful in guiding marketing decisions that the farm has to make. When you have an opportunity to make a decision, do I get my ground beef packed in 1 pound bags or 2 pound bags? You refer to your sentence and you get guidance on that decision in order to better please your customer. So if we work on a strategy sentence like this, let's do an example for this product, Kraft macaroni and cheese. And I understand it's not a farm product, but it's a really easy illustration for us to think about how to use the sentence. So our company makes, forget the farm raises, but what does our company make? Well, we make what? I wish, this is the point, I wish we were all in the same room together and you could shout out your answers, but I'll help you along because I've done this more than a few times. Oh, I jumped a little too ahead. Okay, so we might start to think about, they make macaroni and cheese, right? That's what they make. And then we'd think about, well, who's their target customer? Who do they make this for? And instinctively, you might say, oh, they make this for kids, right? Kids like to eat this. And you keep on thinking, well, what about these kids? Why are they buying it? But really, if we started to think and discuss it together, we'd say, I don't think they're so much making it for the kids. I think they're making it for the parents, right? What are we getting? What service are we providing to the parents? Well, we're giving them a meal that they can make quickly to satisfy these kids. So really what they make is not macaroni and cheese, but rather they make fast, easy dinners, right? That's the product that they deliver. Who do they make it for? They make it for busy parents who are working and have run out of time, right? So they get home, they may like to use farmers market, fresh ingredients and make a scratch cooked meal. But on this day, we give up, we run out of time. We got home late, from driving the kids around to sports practices. The kids still need to do homework and go to bed. We've only got a half an hour to make dinner. We need a fast, easy dinner. So we could write that sentence like this. We make fast, easy meals for busy working moms who have run out of time and give up for today. And I'll just tell you that I put moms in there because research shows that 80% of the groceries purchased in the United States are purchased by women. So I'm going to use that statistic. We could put whatever we want there. We could say busy working parents. So when we write a strategy sentence like this, as Kraft Mac and Cheese, we get at why our consumer values our product and ultimately how we could improve on the product and how we could serve the customer. So if we only had the budget to put an ad in one magazine, let's just pretend we're putting ads in magazines still. We only had the money to put an ad in one magazine. Look at your sentence and think, what magazine should I put this in? Well, you'd want to find a magazine that busy working moms look at. So maybe that's Parenting Magazine, right? That's going to have a better payoff for our advertising dollar than putting our ad in a place where, quote, everyone sees it, right? We don't really want to look for a universal reach right here because that's not efficient in terms of our advertising dollars. We want to reach our target customer specifically. And what would our ad in Parenting Magazine say? Well, we want to tell them what we already know they value. So we're going to have a picture of a bowl of steaming hot macaroni and cheese, and we're going to say, dinner is ready in 4 minutes, something like that, right? We're going to say, this is a fast, easy meal because we know that's what they're looking for. So using this strategy to direct marketing decisions allows us to make more efficient use of our time and our marketing budget, but also to understand and serve our customer even better, to serve them sincerely, to reach them where they want to be reached, to communicate about our product. And if we wanted to improve this product, well, I showed you the old version where you boil water and then you measure milk and you measure butter and you stir it all together. Well, I have young kids. If they were sort of whining and hungry and it was getting late, it seems like that water would take a long time to boil, right? And I need to get going. So they improved the product, if you will, by making it faster and easier. They came out with the microwave version. So that's a sincere understanding of the consumer and improving the product. All these same ideas would apply to you when you write a good strategy sentence for your business. So I'm going to sort of recommend that with the crisis, you could adopt a short-term strategy, which is to sell a secure stockpile of meat to housebound families who are worried about shortages and infection. That would be maybe how you would design your short-term strategy. But ultimately, I think you should also have a long-term strategy. And in the last session that I attended here today, we were talking something about, will this blip end? Yeah, when the pressure of the pandemic lightens on consumers and they start to feel that life has gone back to normal, you're going to need another reason to retain those new customers. I think the pandemic is a great pressure to drive new customers to you, for them to discover you, but you need a long-term strategy, probably focused on either foodies or social cause motivated or traditional buyers or ethnic and religious buyers for the longer run in order to retain those customers hopefully after this pressure is gone. So I'm going to talk briefly about processing rules. It was covered well in the last session if you attended that one. Just wanted to get across to folks that in general, when we're talking about selling meat, the thing that you really need to know about processing rules can be easily sussed out if you think about whether you're selling the customer meat or animals. If you're selling meat to your customer, then it must be USDA inspected. Again, if you're literally selling them packages of meat, then that meat must be USDA inspected. If you're selling your customer an animal, such as a quarter or a half or a whole animal, and it's before the slaughter date, then you can use a custom exempt plan. That's the short version. I don't really want to go down the road of what ifs with processing, but just think in terms of, what am I selling to my customer? Is it a live animal, or am I selling them packages of meat? If it's packages of meat, you must use a USDA inspected facility. All right, so now we're going to create that product. We've taken time to understand our consumer. I'm going to talk about three main bulk products. One would be the traditional wholes, halves, and quarters. That's really based on carcass weight. and the customer gets all the cuts of meat from that whole half or quarter. It's a very traditional and fantastic way to sell meat. The next would be just a nuanced version where we can sort of set the weight for a quarter. It gets a little bit more friendly to the consumer. There's no guesswork about hanging weight. There's no extra explanation about hanging weight. And then finally, bulk bundles or bulk boxes. So I'm going to go in a little more detail about each of these products. The traditional wholes, halves, and quarters, I think everybody's probably most familiar with. It's best to use a price based on hanging weight in reality. You have to understand the custom exempt laws. You might start off getting a deposit based on something like a live weight, but since live weight can't always be attained, then you really ultimately want to figure out the balance based on carcass weight. You can offer split side quarters. That means instead of selling people just the front half, the front of a side or the rear of a side, you give them an assortment of cuts from both the front and the rear. That's a nicer way to sell quarters than making people commit to a front or hind quarter. Offering pre-set cut sheets with few or no options is an idea that I would propose is more consumer friendly, but we're also hearing from some processors that they would rather cut, let's say one animal according to a single cut sheet instead of 4 separate cut sheets because of the time that would take them. So this is something that works well, and I'll have another slide about that. It works well for the processor and for the customer. I would encourage you to call the processor for your customer. Calling a processor and trying to navigate through an order or through a cut sheet can be very intimidating for folks. I think you might also be doing your processor a favor if you call them rather than asking folks who are unfamiliar with this to make that call. And then you can always send your customers the butcher kept your meat by email. This is a great resource created by Penn State. It's called the Butcher Kept Your Meat. If you just search it online, it gives a very clear and simple breakdown of yields from carcass to retail or take-home weight, and then the factors that can influence that yield. So great thing, just send it to your customers, let them read it, and they'll understand a lot more, save you some confusion and some explanation. To simplify the bulk purchase process, so we see that some Vermont processors are reducing options on cut sheets in order for them to increase their throughput. I think this is a great service to farms. If they can process more animals in a day, then there's less of a backlog and people can get into the markets that they want to get into more freely. So I think this is a great development that's coming about with the spike in demand for processing. Full customization, meaning letting your customer make every choice they'd like about every cut in their quarter or their half or their whole, may seem like a very high level of customer service, right? You can get it any way you like. It sounds very, very positive and exciting for the customer. But the fact is that a lot of customers are intimidated by the cut sheet. They're unfamiliar with the choices. And so you can have a preset cut sheet that's very limited. And it's actually, I think, more consumer friendly that way. You're really just asking them, at the basic level, do you want to buy this product or not? Not in a rude tone, but instead of asking them to make all these decisions that they're unfamiliar with. If you do have customers who really want to get specialized, you can still accommodate them, of course, but heading out there with a simpler and clear message with a fixed cut sheet is a recommendation that should be easier for folks to understand. It is an example of a fixed cut sheet. Not to say that this is the ultimate one, but it's sort of, the last time I had a beef cut, I paid attention to how I filled out my cut sheet. And the idea here is that when you're marketing it to people who are unfamiliar, particularly, that you just kind of ask, do you want one like this? And I'll tell you an anecdote that when I was in grad school, I started selling quarters of beef to other grad students. I was getting the beef from my friend's farm. And what I did was I had a single cut sheet. It was, it gets cut this way and that's the only way. And I really eliminated any choice or any questions for my customers. Well, I got, quite a few people to sign up. And I did offer them the option of calling the farmer and doing everything themselves, but nobody took me up on that because they were intimidated by the process, right? So this idea of a fixed cut sheet is consumer friendly. Let them know what it's gonna weigh, what the weight they receive will weigh, and how much they're gonna spend. and then kind of give them a list of cuts. Here's some other examples. If you had different kinds of customers, you could still come up with a couple different variations. Maybe one that was more tipped towards singles and seniors and people that eat smaller portions. One that's tipped towards people that are feeding a lot of mouths per meal. You know, bigger packages, bigger roasts, more steaks per package, and then maybe some griller or food enthusiast cuts with some nuance differences. Point is that you can have a few limited cut sheets. Fixed weight quarters are something that Philly Cowshare did. Philly Cowshare was a company that would buy cattle from farmers in Pennsylvania and then sell them as quarters and halves to consumers in Philadelphia. And to avoid a lot of the discussion and confusion about weights and yields, they did what were called fixed weight quarters. They guaranteed a particular weight for a quarter of a beef, let's say. We could also apply this to other animals. They had a single fixed cut sheet, just like we discussed. And then they would tell the customers what cuts they would receive and how they were going to be cut. They used ground, in this case, ground beef, in order to reach the target weight for each fixed weight quarter. So let's just say, for example, that they guaranteed the customer that the take-home weight of a quarter would be 110 pounds. If it ended up being a smaller carcass animal, they could add packages of ground beef to hit the 110 pounds. If it was a larger animal, they could subtract packages of ground beef to reach the 110 pounds. This is probably, I thought it was a very clever approach to selling meat this way. It would require having somewhat consistent animals, predictable yields for the farm, and some experience getting used to that system. But it's a good idea, and it worked really well for Philly Cowshare. Okay, the last bulk format that I'm going to talk about are bulk bundles. Bundles are just any assortment of cuts, even as small as selling 10 pounds of ground, 10 pounds of ground lamb in a box in 10 individual packages. That would still be a bundle, all the way up through something as large as a whole lamb or a quarter of a beef or a half a hog, that you have assembled sort of the equivalent of those things into a box. The idea with bulk bundles is to help inventory management for the farm. So pairing high and low value cuts together along with ground so that you can help sell the cuts in sort of a ratio that more matches the yields on a carcass, and you don't wind up with selling out quickly of certain cuts while you're backlogging other cuts because you've bundled them together. You come up with a flat price on this, and you can come up with bundles that are in various sizes. So as small as maybe a $50 bundle that can fit in people's home freezers, on up to a $400 bundle with lots of cuts that fit in storage. So you can really meet all different kinds of customers with different budgets and with different freezer capacity. But also, if you're a multi-species farm and you have USDA inspected meat, which of course all of these bundles would have to be USDA inspected, you could do mixed species bundles where they get something that has pork and beef in the same bundle. And just give you an example of a farm that's out here in Western New York that's been doing these for a long time, does a great job. They have several different bundles. Notice that they tell you what the weight is, and then the flat price for each box, and then they have different sort of cuts inside the boxes. I think bundles are really a great way to sell, especially right now. So I've talked about different formats, and I kind of want to give some perspective on these formats in terms of how consumer friendly they are. I think selling traditional quarters is a great way for a farm to market, or if you raise lamb, whole lambs, or if you raise pork, half pigs, and so on. So traditional freezer trade quarters, halves, and wholes, great way to sell. But if we want to talk about what's consumer friendly, we could think about, well, having fixed cut sheets and taking away all that confusion and attempt to understand filling out a cut sheet for the customer would be more friendly. And then even more friendly than that maybe is to have fixed weight or assembled quarters, where we've kind of constructed a quarter that's predictable in terms of its weight and price. And then finally, what's the probably most consumer friendly format to sell bulk meat in? It would be bulk bundles. We can adjust the size and the price to meet lots of different consumers. So for those especially that are trying this out, I would say that bulk bundles are the most consumer friendly way to sell. Now with that, we understand that we can charge more price per pound with the more work that we do, right? So bulk bundles can be priced higher in price per pound of meat sold than traditional quarters. And there's sort of an increasing scale there. My illustration is to say that as you become more consumer friendly, you can charge more per pound for that product because you're actually delivering a higher level of service with each step. And with that service comes farm marketing labor. So it's going to take the greatest amount of effort, farm marketing effort, to sell bulk bundles where you're bringing home animals from the processor in several different boxes and you're sorting them out and inventorying them and creating bundles and figuring out the right prices. That's going to take more effort, right? You're also going to have more customers per animal. So that's going to take more effort compared to traditional sales of quarters and wholes. When I rank these channels, I'm not actually talking about profit per head, right? I think that could remain fixed across all these channels, all these methods. And I'm also not saying that some of these ways of selling are better than others. Rather, they're all different methods that require different levels of farm effort. So it's really just about understanding your consumer, understanding yourself, and knowing what level of marketing you want to get involved in, and then developing your product. All right, now we're going to get to actually selling your products and getting it to your customers. There's lots of ways to take orders for products. During this time, I think you want to probably look online. Yes, you can ask your customers to call you, but do know that there's a generation of folks out there, they're slightly younger than me, that are really intimidated about making phone calls. I know that might sound funny, but they might rather text you, and certainly they might rather email you. So you can have people contact you in various ways, and then probably the simplest way to take orders is to create an online ordering system. There are systems that are free to set up. You only pay when you sell, like using SquareUp. SquareUp is the website version of Square. Square is a cash register application that lots of small businesses use. You can also use Shopify and other systems that are out there. So when I rank these ways of taking orders, I'm going to say that, yeah, actually making the customer call you on the phone is probably, it's okay, it's not bad, but it's probably the least consumer friendly. In this day and age, they would rather contact you online or maybe even by text. Certainly if they're able to order online, that would be ideal. This is an example of a Square store. Just wanted to show you, this is a friend's vegetable farm nearby. They're able to set up this store very simple, simple from the setup. It was quick. It looks good, and having the site up doesn't cost them anything. They only pay for each item that they sell. So it's really nothing to be intimidated by. Okay, taking payment from your customers. Do take a deposit, particularly if you're going to use custom exempt processing, because you want to demonstrate that you sold the animal to the person. I like the idea of just asking your customer to write one check and not write a separate one to the processor. Now, technically, they should be writing a check to the processor. I think there are ways to navigate that space. Again, I don't want to go down the regulations too far. In terms of customer service, making it clear what it's going to cost them. Accepting cash or check, of course, very traditional, no problem. Emailing invoices for services like PayPal and again, Square is making it a little more simple for folks because they can just go online and pay you. And then finally, probably the most consumer-friendly version would be the integrated online and ordering system, like the Square store, where they can shop, put the item in their cart, and pay you online. So they've got ordering and payment done all online, all contactless and simple. Okay, delivering the product to the customer. I do recommend that you pick it up from the processor and deliver it to your customer. I think, again, you might be doing your processor a favor by sparing them having these folks, all these various folks stopping by their place. Also, it's kind of come to be expected during COVID that people get central distribution points at least, and then maybe at the best home delivery. So look at the different ways that you can get your product to your customer. Put down central distribution points, meaning picking one spot in a given town, having a window of time that you'll be there for them to pick up their product, and then all the way down the line. You can also look at other farms that are doing deliveries and try to partner with them. or even other products that are doing home delivery and see home delivery being probably the most consumer friendly way to deliver your product during this time. I'm going to talk briefly about pricing because I think pricing is an important part of this. Cornell has a pricing tool that you can see at calculator.meatsuite.com. You have to have some data from your farm. But I'm going to run you really fast through an example of that. It'll ask you for your cost of production. I'm just going to give you some numbers that I'm using. And then we want our production business to have a profit, so we're going to add $100 per head. I'm going to do a beef example. We're going to say that we have to pay to truck our animal to the processor, and then we have to pay to pick the meat back up from the processor and maybe deliver it to our customers. We're going to pay a slaughter cost or a kill fee at the processor, and then a cut and wrap. So if we add that all up together on a 650 pound carcass, we've already spent $2,107 for our production, our transportation, and our processing. If we keep going, we're going to think about how much time do I invest in selling this product. If I've got 4 customers buying quarters, I've made estimates based on if they were first-time customers, I have maybe more explaining to do. Maybe I have to show them around the farm, down to a repeat customer who's bought from me before and it's very simple, easy to sell. Right? So if I estimate the value of my time when I do this marketing, I'm going to put it at $225 per head to sell 4 quarters. So I'm adding this $225 to the production and processing costs that I've committed so far. Then I'm going to have a marketing effort. Then I'm going to have a marketing profit. Beyond the cost of my time that I spend, the rationale for getting in direct-to-consumer channels is to receive a bigger reward than we can get in other channels, right? So I want to think about really covering the cost of my time, delivering a profit to my production business, paying all my production and processing bills, and then beyond that, even more, getting a large sort of reward for this marketing effort. And I'm going to call that a marketing profit. So I'm going to add another $500 per head. That's the reason why I engage in these marketing channels. So I wound up with this total cost on this animal, if you followed me through those, at $2,832. With a 650 pound carcass, that price that I would advertise to the consumers, inclusive of my profits, is $435 a pound hanging weight. That means that my customers will each pay $708 for a quarter. And at a 62% yield from that carcass weight, they can expect to receive about 100 pounds of meat, which means that the weighted average price for all cuts that they receive is $7.08 a pound. If I was going to create bundles, the 708 would be my starting point. But then bundles take additional effort, so I would go higher than the 708. If you're worried about getting that price, don't worry. Customers don't buy on price alone. In fact, marketing management, effective marketing management, can help you demand the prices that you need to receive in the channels. In other words, a friend said to me, "Matt, I see the kinds of prices that you're talking about, and I just couldn't get those prices for my meat." Well, yeah, because in that case, the entire marketing effort was a sticker on the door of their farm pickup truck. That's not sufficient marketing to receive the higher prices. But when you take the time to understand consumers, you build a marketing strategy, you have effective communication with your consumers, and you develop your product to serve them, you can receive those better prices. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit and say the final step is to reach out and reach your consumers. Think about why they're seeking your product. In your communication, you want to reflect why your target customer is seeking your product. How do they like to be reached? Where do they like to be reached? Is it receiving a postcard in their mailbox? It could be. Chances are it's online or on Facebook. What descriptions of your product will resonate with them? Consider their needs, motivations, desires, and buying habits. Be prepared to answer questions concisely with your customers, because this may be a first time for them. When you're communicating with customers, avoid jargon, false claims, sob stories, and I really recommend against criticizing the industry or other farms. It's very tempting to do that. The focus here is to tell people what you're proud of and what you do well, and don't tell them what you think is wrong with what other folks are doing. Let me give you an example of how to keep it positive. It might be tempting to say, other eggs can sit in storage for as long as 6 weeks before the sale, right? That's talking about the industry or what's going on somewhere else. Instead, keep that positive, say, our eggs go from the farm to you in less than 5 days. That's a way to take a message and really keep it positive. The places that you can reach consumers, of course, I have to say Facebook. Doesn't mean we have to like Facebook, but it's sort of like the phone book of today. You wouldn't have started a business in the 1980s and said, no, I'm not putting my business in the phone book, right? Well, unfortunately, the reality of today is that if you start a business, you probably need to get it on Facebook. If this isn't something you're comfortable with, you should ask around for help, whether it's from your neighbors or your kids or your friends. You can do some of the older methods. Press releases still work. You can do direct mailing to targeted neighborhoods about your farm and about your product, and you can join email lists that serve particular neighborhoods. So I've talked about how to get started. I hope that you'll be the one that gets those 51 shares. And I just want to briefly mention that there are some resources that I've created on meat marketing. They're just about 2-page essays. If you search Cornell Smart Marketing online, you'll find the website, and then you want to look for the essays from October to December of 2017 and January of 2018. And finally, before Q&A, I'll just share my email address. It may take me a few days to reply, but you're certainly welcome to send questions to me that might occur to you later on, or for clarification, welcome to email me at this address. With that, I'll stop and field some questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. This is not only excellent, I presume, for our audience, but also myself as a scaling up meat producer in the last year in particular, and how I have to shift my own customers to go from some modes to other modes. So, plus I have pigs going to the butcher next week, so it's really relevant for me personally. I can't speak for others. Anyway, we have some terrific questions. Folks have been adding into the Q&A, and one of the ones that has risen to the top at this point is, you did mention online ordering platforms. I'm curious what you think about variable weight on online ordering platforms. I think maybe you've talked about bulk, set weight, right. But I'm curious what you think about online ordering platforms and what can work or not work for a variable weight product.
Yeah, so, I'm not copping out on you, but of course this was about bulk buying. So yeah, when it comes to bulk buying, it's much simpler because you don't have to worry about those variable weights. And yeah, I don't have a brilliant solution to the problem that you can't list variable weight products on Square online. You can do it with Square, the app. So if you're at a farmer's market, you can put in variable weights into your pricing system at a farmer's market and sell them that way. But if you want to have online ordering through Square, they don't allow variable weight pricing. It's something I would love to hear someone else's suggestion, but I think that, to fall back on the topic of this talk, there is still even the simplest way of bundling. So I think it's going to be labor intensive, but let's say you have ribeye steaks, you can try to pack those steaks into 5-pound boxes or something like that. There's really no, like I said, there's no brilliant solution at this time. Or conversely, you could put individual packages up as separate items, right? Priced specific, that package. That sounds like a inventory nightmare to me. But yeah, the variable weight products for online sales are challenging, no doubt. And maybe that's the opportunity to come up with really tiny bundles. And I'll tell you something quickly, because it strikes me. I've done some point of sale, like Square, point of sale data research with vegetable farmers. And something that came out of that project, I presented it at the NOFA Vermont Conference last year, something that came out of that for me was that in sometimes at farmers market situations for vegetable producers, we're selling products that are less than $3, right? So we have all these customers coming to our stall, keeping us busy, and they're spending less than $3. And I as an advocate for the farmer, I sort of began to resent that. I guess I got this idea that if they're going to come and take our time, we need to ask for a larger commitment, right? So that might apply to this idea of variable weight products. If you're going to buy my steaks, you need to make a commitment to me. And that's just a philosophy. Maybe I shouldn't have said it, but it sort of occurs to me. Anyway.
I will add that I've worked with farmers who have used barn to door and also graze cart. There are expenses that come along with those, and sort of up to the farmer to determine if that's going to be a good fit for them. But great question. I personally have integrated WooCommerce, which is sort of like Squarespace, onto my own website. And now I'm just making little bundles, just like you're talking about, Matt. It's much easier. It doesn't do variable weight very well. So another question was, where are some of the places that you've seen farmers find success in advertising, and how does social media fit into that? Social media do all of it, or are you finding success for folks in other places too?
Yeah, and I'm no social media expert, but it is, in terms of cost and effort, is just the simplest. And yeah, what I would encourage folks to do when they want to reach customers is to first think about that target customer. So that's how I started off this presentation. Really take the time to describe a very specific target customer that you're going to serve, and then take the time to understand them. And it was in some of those slides, understand where they want to be reached, how they want to be reached, what words will resonate with them, so you can lead yourself to the most effective places. Let's just think, out loud for a minute. Let's brainstorm. If we were trying to sell bulk meat to, families with small children, families that are feeding 3, 4, 5 people at a meal, then we'd think about, well, where can we find families with small children, right? We can find them at daycares, at schools, at churches. So maybe that's where you should be bringing your messaging in as flyers or brochures. But you can also find them in Facebook groups, or what we're calling mom groups. There are regional mom groups, county mom groups, city mom groups, groups that talk about healthy eating. So I think your research on your customer and your time to understand them will actually lead you to the most effective places, not so much me trying to rattle off where those places.
Good answer, though. We can't know everything. One of the next questions is around what kinds of meats are you seeing in particular coming into demand, and also, is that including meats other than beef? Are you seeing goat? Are you seeing other kinds of meats coming into bulk sales too?
I don't think I'm going to talk from my own anecdotal time in the past year talking to other farmers on Zoom. Unfortunately, it stays very traditional. So it's beef, pork, and chicken, right? That's what people are used to cooking. I don't think lamb got quite the same kind of demand boom that beef and pork and chicken did, because I think for a lot of consumers, where do they eat lamb? Out at a restaurant. I'm actually starting to work with some oyster farmers, and they said people love oysters, but they don't eat them at home. They eat oysters in a restaurant, so they were facing a challenge. So yeah, I don't have any anecdotes of goat, lamb, or duck producers that I've talked to see this quite the same level of boom that beef, pork, and chicken producers have. That said, and I have friends that raise rabbit, they did ultimately sell more because that's the meat that they still had. So when the chickens were sold out and there were only ducks in the freezer, they sold duck.
So we're getting close on time. So I feel like I should ask you this one last question that feels exceedingly topical. It's similar to a question that was asked in the previous session, but it's a great opportunity to give you your shot at it. What do you think the trends are likely to be? Do you think this bulk sales is going to continue, and how do you think people should capitalize on it if it is going to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad I got a chance to weigh in on it. Bulk sales is something that I had been paying a lot of attention to for years in my job at Cooperative Extension, and I feel that we did observe a bubble in like 09, 10, 11, where a lot of consumers had new interest in buying in bulk. That was also right after the economic recession in 08, where people were looking more at growing their own vegetable gardens. And I think that buying bulk meat went hand in hand with that. Then it seemed to have cooled off, and then of course it went crazy. I think rather than try to predict what will happen, because I don't know, and as a worrier, I'd probably be negative. But rather than that, I'd say let's come up with strategies for retention. This pandemic gave all of our farms an opportunity to have new customers thrust at us. And that's part of why I made this topic consumer-friendly bulk. If we can keep this product easy to buy, easy to understand, consumer-friendly, we can hope to retain those customers even as the pressures of the pandemic, fade off and they kind of get back to their normal life. If we're producing, we know we're producing quality and deliciousness. If we can keep it friendly and easy for them to buy, then we don't have to worry about the trend. That's a cop-out answer, but I sincerely believe it as well. I think this is our opportunity to capture and retain these folks with great service.
Well, thank you so much. A great answer, by the way. I'm glad you got to weigh in on this one too. Thank you so much. Thank you to Matt. Thank you to everyone for attending today. If you've had the chance, or if you haven't had the chance, please jump over to the poll. We've got some post-session evaluations. Join us again tomorrow, and for live sessions if you can. And if you can't, they will be recorded for 6 months. And jump on the community. We've got people asking all kinds of great questions right now. Over on the left-hand side, we've got lots of conversations happening. And please jump on. We want to hear from you. So thank you so much. Oh, and I also will say that if there are questions that we were not able to get to, we're going to try to answer them in the Q&A, and or if you have any additional resources, feel free to drop them in the chat. I was trying to drop in as many of Matt's references as possible as we went along, but if I missed anything, we'll try to catch those and drop them in the chat as well. Thanks very much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.